News moves at lightning speed, so chances are you may have missed something. Welcome to Week in One, the show that helps you catch up with the top news stories and interviews featured on ENCA over the past 7 days. I'm Abigail Visagie. Let's get straight into a few of this week's top stories. The latest on the escape of the Facebook rapist and murderer Tabo Bester from Mangaung prison. President Cyril Ramaphosa visits flood victims in the Eastern Cape, where 4 people have died. And hundreds of contract nurses in Gauteng marched to the union buildings. One of the stories that made headlines this week and has South Africans talking is the escape of the convicted Facebook rapist and murderer Tabo Bester. Bester was thought to have died in his prison cell back in 2022, but it was confirmed he escaped from the Mangaung prison last year. He apparently faked his own death in a prison fire and escaped. He is now on the run and has been living a lavish lifestyle for months. ENCA senior reporter Slindelo Masekane has the story.
Behind these gates is a multi-million rand mansion which convicted rapist, now turned fugitive, Tabo Bester was living in. He wasn't alone though. It's alleged he shared this Hyde Park home with his socialite girlfriend. The pair has vanished and a manhunt launched for Bester. But are the police looking into Bester's alleged girlfriend, Nandipa Makudumana?
As the SAPS, we cannot at this stage reveal the identities of persons of interest. What we can say for now is that our focus at this stage is apprehending this fugitive of justice.
An internal probe by the Department of Correctional Services, which confirmed that Bester did not die during a fire at Mangaung prison, is being challenged by the contractor.
We are now engaging with the second leg in terms of what does the contract say when it comes to an escape. But number two, the security breaches that we've identified. Unfortunately, there is no common ground. We don't seem to find each other with the contractor in terms of our findings and what they think to be their findings.
If my understanding is correct, then is the contractor then disputing that the body is not of Tabo Bester?
Yes, there are disagreements. They maintain that the inmate whom was allocated that particular cell is the one that died in that fire, and we are saying that is not the case.
So who should be held liable for the escape and the cover-up?
Every single person that had a role to play in this actively participated in the commission of the crime, and they should all be held liable.
Police say investigations are at a critical stage and are appealing for patience. Slindelo Masekane, Johannesburg.
Contract nurses in Gauteng are demanding permanent employment from the government. They are accusing the Provincial Health Department of exploiting them. Hundreds of nurses, some of whom were employed during the COVID-19 pandemic, say they are battling to make ends meet after their contracts were terminated. ENCA's Mangaung reports.
A march over what they say is exploitation by the Gauteng Health Department.
We are saying EPWPs, which some of them have been exploited for more than 15 years. This contract is supposed just to be a one-year contract. When there is opportunities for them to be employed, they are excluded. They are ignored completely. The second issue is the issue of contract workers. We've seen nurses particularly being put as contract workers instead of for them to be on a short period, 2 years, by agency who squander all this money. And these workers have got no benefits, they've got nothing. A serious gross violation of labor rights of our workers.
These healthcare workers marched to the Provincial Health Department as well as the Premier's office to hand over a memorandum.
We want the Premier to intervene on this matter. We want the Premier to actually say directly and specifically which dates are we going to be permanently absorbed.
Meanwhile, contract workers whose employment has already been terminated say they want to be reinstated.
It is stressing for each and every one of us as professionals seated at home. We never thought that a nurse can sit at home being unemployed. This is affecting us, our families. We can't cater for them. We can't pay the insurances, the rent. Some are renting. We are the breadwinners. I'm a mother, I'm a father to my kids.
The Gauteng Health Department had this to say.
there's issues of budgetary constraints that obviously we need to look into insofar as areas where we need to permanently absorb people. If you look at the COVID-19 post, for example, that they've mentioned, we've only received 600 million for us to be able to utilize that grant.
The unions have given the provincial government 7 days to respond and are threatening legal action against government if it does not accede to their demands. Angoba Mchunu, Johannesburg.
On Tuesday, DA councillor Silius Brink was voted in as the new mayor of Tshwane. Brink won the mayoral vote in the metro with 109 votes. The newly elected Tshwane mayor says he is aiming for a corruption-free administration. Moloko Moloto spoke to him shortly after his election.
You were here before, you went to Parliament, you definitely have a clear understanding of the issues here. You have outlined what your priorities are, but I want you to tell us what would be the non-negotiables as you now take this office, the things that would really not be tolerated from your side.
So it is critically important that we get control of the finances of the city. If we don't do that, we can't secure a reliable supply of services. If we don't take fairly bold measures to get control of finances and to ensure that there's value for what people pay in rates, tariffs, and charges, then Tshwane is going to end up another Mangaung. That is not what we want. We want to build a world-class capital city, a city that works and one that works for all of its people.
Almost all the political parties represented in council congratulated you. But what really struck me was the message from the Freedom Front Plus leader, who said that there has been a lot of corruption over the years. So many things had been swept under the carpet, and it's about time those issues are confronted. I'm not too sure whether you do have an idea of the intensity of corruption in this municipality. Of course, he was clear that he doesn't actually care as to under whose administration those things have happened.
What we find, we have to clean out. That is as simple as that. The Auditor General had found that controls in the city have broken down. And when you have a breakdown of controls, you simply don't know all of the things that are going wrong. We've got a hint that the city is in serious financial difficulty. That hints at we're not getting value from tenders being issued by the city. We're not collecting what is due to the city. We don't know what's happening with payments in the city. So getting a proper idea of what the books looks like, restoring financial controls, and then dealing with the consequences, whatever those consequences might be. It's clean out time, because if we don't do that, if we're not candid about the extent of things that have gone wrong, we've got no hope of fixing them.
After the break, we feature some of the big interviews done by our anchors. Welcome back to Weekend One. I'm Abigail Visagie. Now, it's emerged over the weekend that the man known as the Facebook rapist, serving time for rape and murder in prison in Mangaung, did not die by suicide in a fire in his cell last May. This was uncovered by online non-profit news agency Ground Up. For more, ENCA anchor Sally Burdett spoke to Ground Up editor Nathan Geffen.
I know that you've been listening to Slee's story, and it seems that G4S is saying, no, he did die. What do you make of this?
So even let's assume for a moment that G4S is correct. They've still got very, very difficult questions to answer. I don't think that by denying that Bester escaped, they get off the hook. They've still got to explain how it is that someone burned to death in their cell, in their prison, in their maximum security prison. How it is that the coroner found that the person was dead before the fire, that they died of blunt force trauma, and according to the police was actually murdered. How it is that that body was 25 centimeters shorter than Tabo Bester, how it, at least according to the coroner. How it is that there is the CCTV cameras, which were pointing in the wrong direction in some instances across the prison, nevertheless managed to catch two people hastily exiting the prison at the time that this incident occurred. How it is that a man who looks suspiciously like Tabo Bester is on video in 2018 at a glamorous Johannesburg event where people go and sing happy birthday to him, and it coincidentally is the same birthday as Tabo Bester's. And then how it is that a man who looks suspiciously like Tabo Bester was actually photographed at Woolies in Sandton Square a month or so after you're supposed to be dead. So, and I haven't even finished all the questions, but let's get those ones answered first, G4S.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The company is very silent. We've tried our London correspondent trying to get hold of headquarters there. Of course, it's a British multinational. We've been trying our side. I'm sure you have been trying as well. But you mentioned that astonishing situation with Tabo Bester, that he was able to run a media company from his prison cell with a laptop. And then he even organized an event. There were staff, there were premises. Let's just take a look. At that moment, he was saying happy birthday.
We hope you're not crying.
And Nathan, that is footage I think you managed to get hold of.
Correct.
And that was actually Tabo Bester, not in New York, as he told everyone there, but actually in Bloemfontein, in his prison cell. We're dealing not just with a rapist and a murderer here, but a scam artist of phenomenal proportions.
Exactly. And where did he get the suit from? I mean, that isn't a standard prison outfit, I don't think. By the way, your experience with G4S, exactly the same as ours. They stonewall us at every attempt. They hide behind this clause in the contract which says they may not comment to the media. And yet, they really do have a lot of questions to answer.
Gauteng Economic Development MEC Tasneem Motara has dissolved 2 provincial boards, the Gauteng Growth Development Agency and the Gauteng Gambling Board. ENCA anchor Dan Moyane spoke to Dr. Sibongile Velakazi and advocate Anthea Platt about the why.
So you were fired on Friday from the board. The board was dissolved on Friday. Did you see this coming?
Yes, we saw it coming. Some of us, we even were willing to allow that process to happen because we just couldn't stand what we were being asked to be doing.
What were you being asked to do by the MEC?
Basically to start a process from scratch, a process that had been seen to a conclusion. And we've believed quite strongly as a board that we at least deserved a reason why the process must be started.
What was this process about, which you said had already started?
So it's a process of finding a CEO. It started with the previous MEC, Pakstau.
Okay.
So the legislation is quite clear that the MEC appoints, and it's silent on what is the process of appointment. But there are other pieces of policies and legislation that direct to how that process must run. And essentially the process sits with the board. There's precedents in the past. The other MECs, previous MECs, have followed this process, and it had never been questioned before.
But the new MEC didn't want to follow the process that had been used before, and it had no problems.
Yes. So she was insisting that she needs to manage the process herself. So she must take it out of the board and manage it herself, and the board must simply nominate a board member who will go into this process of hers and represent the board there.
You are also a former chairperson of an important agency in Gauteng, and that's the Gambling Board. Last month, your board was dissolved. Why?
Over similar issues that Sibongile has just touched on, and that is the acting CEO position. So we were also in the process of appointing a CEO. And at that stage, we were in the last section of it doing final interviews when the MEC decided that she wanted to appoint an acting CEO, which she has the right to do, but also there's processes to follow.
Yeah, I've seen some of the correspondence that have been shared between yourselves and the MEC, and then I've seen the City Press story. And I'm just wondering here, are we talking here about an MEC, I mean, who's not really willing, so to speak, to follow due process, and therefore that speaks to governance?
Yes. She says she wants to follow processes, and when we want to follow that process, then she says she has the power to do it despite the process. So hence, that's what she did. She appointed the acting CEO, fired the current acting CEO, and then just ran with her own process.
Promoting the culture of accountability in the Gauteng province. Well, that was the theme of this year's Provincial Clean Audit and Ethical Governance Seminar, which took place on Wednesday. ENCA anchor Gareth Edwards spoke to Finance MEC Jacob Mombolo on the South African Morning.
I'm hearing oversight. I think that's the key word here, isn't it? It's oversight, making sure money is properly spent. There's people in place that are going to make sure money isn't spent irresponsibly. That's what you're saying. It's oversight.
Yes, oversight, accountability.
It absolutely is. And a lot of what you're saying as well, you'll agree, is economic development as well. Of course it is.
Can I speak to that issue?
You can as well. And while you speak to that issue, MEC, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you about the MEC for Economic Development, dissolving the boards of the Gauteng Gambling Board and the Gauteng Growth Development Agency. Where's the oversight there? It's a problem, and that must be keeping you up at night. There's accusations coming out that, and I want to use the words, the MEC being described as irrational. And this is the Economic Development MEC. How do you take that forward? What's the positivity here? Give me some good news.
I think before I speak to how clean governance, clean audit, good management of public finances is a big determinant for economic growth and for job creation and all that. Just on the point you're raising, I think one of your colleagues who conducted the interview, and hoping my memory...
Dan Moyane.
Yes. I think he made a very profound point that, and he repeated this, he said the MEC will be given the opportunity to the right of reply and the opportunity to be heard. And I think that's very important. So to that extent, I'll not be commenting on that matter because I think your colleague is absolutely right. Let's not preempt that. Let's allow the MEC the opportunity.
And the MEC will respond, I'm sure, but in the spirit of oversight, not having a board at two of these companies and two of these agencies would worry someone like you who's just been talking about oversight. You would prefer, obviously, to have board members providing oversight. You would agree?
Well, as I said, I think let's stick to what the channel said, and I commend you for, giving the MEC the opportunity, the right of reply. I think what is more important for me, and this came out very well, particularly from the AG yesterday, from the head of the Gauteng Ethics Advisory Council yesterday, Dr. Nombe, is that in an environment where there's poor governance, there's mismanagement of public funds, there's instability, like we're seeing in the city of Tshwane. In that environment, it is a huge deterrent to investors that want to put their money in that space. And as part of the brick that is required to build the economy of this country, it is critical that Gauteng, which contribute 35% into the GDP of the country, that environment is efficient, it's effective, it's stable, and its overall governance becomes a very good incentive to investors.
Coming up, President Cyril Ramaphosa visits the Eastern Cape, where recent floods have claimed the lives of 4 people. Welcome back to Week in One. I'm Abigail Visagie. Now, government has no intention of neglecting the needs of victims of natural disasters. Well, that's the commitment from President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was part of a delegation that visited Port St. John's in the Eastern Cape on Tuesday. It follows the deaths of 4 people during last week's floods that left hundreds of people homeless and caused extensive damage to roads and bridges in the town. ENCA's Ronald Masinda was there.
Port St. John's and other disaster-hit areas in South Africa will receive the necessary attention from the government. That's the word from President Cyril Ramaphosa, who received warm applause from residents shortly after visiting the town.
Government is gearing into action. Tomorrow we've got contractors that are going to start building temporary shelters. We've got our traditional leaders, our king here, has delineated land that we can use to temporarily shelter our people. So a combination of forms of assistance is coming together, and I think much as people will always be a bit unhappy, but government is making all the efforts.
COGTA Minister Themisile Nkalimeng says the government will pay extra attention to municipalities that might experience similar natural disasters in the future.
So the South African Weather Service must warn you, but you must be prompt so that you don't lose life. And that's our key responsibility as government. But secondly, some of the planning really, as they say, beyond the planning of municipalities, you also need even planning for disaster. I mean, why would you go and look around on whether our banks have got sponges when people are already sitting in a hall? So we need to have food banks in such areas because we know they are prone. We also need to have logistic and material banks to ensure that our response rate is even quicker.
The relief efforts will be most welcomed in a town that is eager to get its economy fully operational after many businesses were also affected by the recent heavy rainfall. Ronald Masinda, Port St. John's.
Thursday's council meeting that had been called to elect a new mayor of Mangaung was postponed until further notice. Mxolisi Sionzana, who was elected in 2021, recently resigned as the executive mayor. ENCA reporter Moloko Moloto has more details.
You were meant to hold a council meeting as the councillors of Mangaung to elect the new executive mayor. That didn't happen. Why?
We received threats yesterday and this morning. We received messages stating that today is going to be very unsafe at the municipality. There were planned boycotts, protests from different organizations within Mangaung. And we just felt it's not going to be safe for the councillors of Mangaung or the officials of Mangaung if we continue with the council meeting.
Do you have any idea why some people would want to threaten councillors? Could it be because some of the ANC councillors defied their party line and voted for you as the council speaker, perhaps?
I don't necessarily think it's really about what happened in council. We've had a few disruptions, even yesterday during the council meeting. Employees are unhappy. They say they're not getting paid the overtime they were supposed to get paid this month. So there's a lot of different factors that come into play. So I don't necessarily think it's because of what happened yesterday and the ANC being angry about some of the councillors voting with the opposition. But like I say, there's different factors that come into play.
Oscar Pistorius may soon be a free man. The parole hearing for Pistorius commenced on Friday. It's been over 10 years since he shot and killed his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp, on Valentine's Day. Pistorius is serving 13 years for the murder, and Heidi Jokos has been following the story.
It's a story that shocked the world back in 2013. Model Riva Steenkamp was shot dead by her then-partner and now disgraced Paralympian Oscar Pistorius. He was initially sentenced for culpable homicide in 2014. The conviction was later appealed and he was then sentenced for murder. The former athlete has now served the minimum time of his sentence, making him eligible for parole.
It has to be understood that Mr. Pistorius was given a 13 years and 5 month sentence and has served just over 7 years, meaning that he has served the minimum required time, thus becoming eligible to be considered for parole placement.
Both Pistorius and Riva's mother, June Steenkamp, will be before the parole board on Friday. The Steenkamp family believes Pistorius has not been honest about what really happened to Riva or why she was shot.
June and Barry accepts that parole is part of our South African legal system, and Oscar Pistorius, just like any other offender, is entitled to be considered for placement on parole after having served a certain portion of his sentence. They have always questioned Oscar Pistorius' version of what happened that night, in the same way that the Supreme Court of Appeal have said that Pistorius had failed to explain why he fired the fatal shots and failed to take the court fully into his confidence. as he did not explain to the court what exactly had happened that night.
It's not yet clear for how long the parole board will deliberate or when it will make a decision. Heidi Jakos in Pretoria.
And that's it for this weekend's edition of Weekend One. From myself and the team, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a fantastic weekend. Take care.